Hey guys, welcome back to Tutorbox live in conjunction with COVID-19 catch-up sessions. My name is Seho and I'm your Tutorbox Life Science tutor. So, for those of you who don't know me, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. First of all, I am not 14. I may look 14, but I'm not 14. A lot of people think that I'm like, this young child, but hey, I am an oldie, but a kid at heart. What do? I study at the University of the Witwatersrand and currently I am doing my fourth year in biomedical engineering. Yeah, it's been a journey, guys. It's been real. Okay, so there's a lot of things in life that I love, okay? But one of those things would be biology, okay? It's just so fascinating to know how we living organisms do this thing called living, just like the complex things of knowing how do we breathe, how does our heart beat and all this kind of stuff. I like bio because of these things. There are other sections I'm like, do we have to study that? But there are other sections the life processes that I'm very interested in, and that's why this is just one of my favorite things. I mean, I remember the one time we were doing physiology last year, and I think it was just one of my favorite sections when we were learning about blood. So I was the one time I cut my hand a little bit over here, and then it started bleeding. And then I started imagining all the processes that's going through my hand at the moment. So it's like, okay, so all of these coagulation factors are going to start doing this, that, blah, 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 blah. Then my wound is going to stop bleeding. And then, and I was like, wait a second. Why can't I do things without having to know the exact processes? But also at the same time, it was just so interesting. I love it. It also just reflects all God's wonderful work that He has done. So yay for that. Why I decided to tutor this biology? Well, because I was once upon a time a student like you. I used to struggle with bio and never understood why I didn't get the marks that I wanted to get. I would study all the time, but then just not produce the correct marks. The marks that I wanted to get. I didn't understand why. Until I realized when I got into varsity and I started doing bio in my first and second year. I noticed that I missed out on so many things when I was in matric, and in all the years of when we studied bio, I didn't understand that bio is actually connected. What you do in grade 10 builds up into what you do in grade 11, and grade 11 to matric, and then afterwards it also just you apply all that knowledge, all that foundation in varsity. So for me, it was just a great eye opener, and I could have done so much better had I took the time to properly understand things and not just sit down and cram. Okay, because when you understand things, you'll be able to make the connections that you need to do. Okay, so let's get into it. So let's get started with meiosis. So with meiosis, we're going to do revision on the importance of this process, and then afterwards we're going to look at how meiosis takes place. So meiosis is essentially like a reduction division, and what this means is that as the cell undergoes these divisions, then its chromosome number decreases. Okay, so essentially the definition or the process of what happens in mitosis is that a parent cell would undergo a division that would result in 4 daughter cells that would have half the number of chromosomes that the parent cell had. Okay, so meiosis usually happens in the gametes, your sex cells. So these gametes are known as haploid cells, and you need the male and the female haploid cells to come together to form a diploid cell, which is known as a zygote. Okay, but for now we're just focusing on the beginning part, just making these gametes. Okay, so now I'm sure you guys know that as humans we have 46 chromosomes. Okay, so that would mean that each of these gametes that we produce would have 23 chromosomes in each of them. Okay, and the main importance of meiosis is so that it can contribute to genetic variation in offspring. Okay, and this happens in one of the phases that we'll go through in a moment. The photo on the right just shows the end result of interphase, and then the end result of meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So this organism over here, it had 4 chromosomes. Then interphase happens and you can see that the DNA has doubled and stuff like that. So then when meiosis 1 happens, the daughter cells have 2 chromosomes in each, and then those daughter cells undergo meiosis 2, and then each of them are going to have 2 chromosomes. So all 4 daughter cells are going to have 2 chromosomes. So like I've said, meiosis has got 2 phases, or rather 2 processes. So we have meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. And the phases that are in meiosis 1 are labeled with the 1. So prophase 1, metaphase 1, anaphase 1, telophase 1. And the same thing happens with meiosis 2. So let's get right into it. So we know that the first thing that's going to happen before meiosis happens is interphase, okay? So in interphase, the DNA is replicated in preparation for meiosis, okay? Then what comes next is prophase. Now in prophase, you have to list all these things. So your chromosomes thicken, the spindle fibers start to form, the centrosomes, they start to migrate to the opposite ends of the poles, the nuclear membrane starts to dissolve, the nucleoid also starts to dissolve or disappear, and yeah. So what we'll do is we're going to draw that out now. Okay, so there I've drawn my DNA, the chromatin network that is still loose. Then afterwards it's going to become condensed. So now we're moving into prophase. Right, so here we have our nuclear membrane that is dissolving. Okay, now the important thing that happens in this stage is that in meiosis 1, prophase 1, we have this process called crossing over. Now, crossing over is when the genetic information is exchanged between homologous pairs. So first we say that homologous pairs, homologous pairs, they pair up, okay? And homologous pairs are basically the chromosomes that are similar in shape and size, okay? So those chromosomes, they come together and then afterwards they cross over. They swap their genetic information. This part is important because what it does is that it increases the genetic variation. Okay, so we'll draw that next. Okay, and we'll just also add in our centrosomes that are starting to migrate to the opposite parts of the pole. Okay, then next up we'll have metaphase. So metaphase, what happens is that the homologous pairs, they line up at the equator of the cell. The centrosomes are at the opposite ends of the cell and they have released their spindle fibers and they're attached to the centromeres of each chromosome. Okay, so let's draw that out. Right, so yeah, so don't forget that you have to phrase these things the way that I have said it, or however your textbook or your notes have put it, because that's where a lot of your marks come from. It's important to say homologous pairs line up at the equator. Spindle fibers are attached to the centromeres, and then afterwards we're going to move into, okay, that's not a point, but we're moving into anaphase next. So in anaphase, what happens is that once the homologous pairs are lined up in the middle, then what's going to happen is that the spindle fibers contract, pulling the chromosomes across to the ends of the cell. Okay, let's draw that out. Cool. So now that has happened, we'll just draw the cells like in telophase. Okay, so see how we went from having an organism with 4 chromosomes, and at the end of meiosis 1, the daughter cells ended up with 2 chromosomes. Okay, so now we're going to repeat the process, but I'm not going to draw them out again because I think that we get the point of how this thing works. I'm just going to show you images of how this, what the results is going to look like. Okay. So we have prophase 2. We're going to continue on from the cells that we had at the end of meiosis 1. So in prophase 2, the chromosomes start to thicken, okay? The nuclear membrane, the nucleolus start to disappear. And the centrosomes, they move to opposite ends of the poles. Okay, and then afterwards we have metaphase. The chromosomes, they line up at the equator of the cell. The spindle fibers from the centrosomes, they attach onto the centromeres of the chromosomes. Okay, and then afterwards we have anaphase 2, where the spindle fibers will contract, pulling the chromosomes across to the opposite ends of the cell. Okay, and when they get there, telophase then comes in, whereby the nuclear membrane starts to form, the nucleolus reappears, the centrosomes disappear, and then we get cytokinesis. Okay, I know I didn't say that in the last part, but I think you guys do get the point. Cytokinesis, the cell splits into two, or if it's a plant cell, a plate will form in the middle, splitting the cell into two. And that is the end of meiosis 2, resulting in 4 daughter cells with half the amount of chromosomes that the parent cell had. So, problems that can happen in meiosis. So, in meiosis, there could be a non-disjunction of chromosomes. So non-disjunction can either happen in Anaphase 1 or in Anaphase 2. If it happens in Anaphase 1, then that's because the homologous pairs did not split up. Okay? If it happens in Anaphase 2, then that means that the chromosomes did not split up. This can result in a cell that has one more chromosome or one less chromosome. Okay, so you'll have 4 daughter cells, for example, and one will have more chromosomes, one will have less, and then the other ones will be normal. Okay, so this can occur in parents that are older and they're trying to conceive children. So if they're more or less over the age of 45, trying to have kids, then this non-disjunction situation can happen in their gametes when they're trying to divide. So the disorder that we're gonna look at is Down syndrome. It's when they have an extra chromosome on the 21st chromosome. So now, just little information. Our chromosomes, if you had to lay them down on a karyotype, then what happens is that your chromosomes are labeled from 1 to 23. So the 23rd one being the 6th chromosome, okay? So the 21st chromosome, if there is one extra chromosome there, so instead of them being 2, then there's 3, then that is when the child has Down syndrome, or the person has Down syndrome. Okay, and usually the characteristics that results from having Down syndrome, the person could have slanted eyes, a large tongue, small ears, small hands. They could have moderate to mild mental disabilities. They could have stunted growth. So a lot of the times these types of genetic defects, what they do is that they affect the people mentally and physically. Okay, so the chromosome 21, that's not the only place where this defect can occur. It can occur on any of the chromosomes, but then apparently this is extra information also, you don't have to know this, because I told you that your chromosomes are in different sizes. So maybe the smaller the chromosome, right, if that one has been you have one extra chromosome on those, then the child is likely to survive. They'll have a longer lifespan. But the bigger the chromosome, then the more likely that the child is going to have a shorter lifespan. So so like I said, the cause was that the parents are old, 45 years, even higher. The higher the age, and the more likely that this non-disjunction situation can occur. Okay, so that is the end of one section. We're going to take an early break so that we can spend more time going over the next section. So please take this time to enjoy your break, and I'll see you again in 4 minutes. welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Now we're going to continue on with the next section. So now we're going to continue with reproduction in vertebrates. Yay! So basically what we're going to do revision on is the diversity of reproductive strategies. So here we'll be looking at like the reproductive process, and then afterwards we'll be looking at the embryonic development, and then lastly we'll be looking at the growth of that offspring. Okay, so how it survives out in the wild. Right, so let's get into R and K reproductive strategies, okay? So R and K strategies, you'll look more into these things later, but for now they just want you to focus on like the reproductive kind of side of these. So R stands for rates, so growth rates, and K will stand for carrying capacity, okay? More information later on in the year, okay? Just know these two for now. So basically, our strategies of like reproduction is that they create a lot of offspring, and when they create a lot of offspring, they spend a lot of energy trying to create these, and then because they have so many children, I mean, like, imagine they could have like thousands, okay, of offspring, then less parental care will be on these kids, so the parents will be taking less care like of the kids, okay? And this is more because like a lot of the times these would be born developed enough to be able to take care of themselves, okay, these offspring. So hence less parental care is needed. And also more with our strategies is that a lot of them will die. So like maybe like it gives birth to 1,000 and like 800 die, then it's going to be left with 200 kids, okay? So what these 200 kids are going to do, those are the ones that are going to survive, and then they're going to go on when they keep on living. When they get to a reproductive stage in their life, then they will make children, and then they'll also make thousands of kids, and like thousands of them will die, and only a few of them will survive, and this happens, they grow on. So a lot of these R strategy reproduction is like done on, or species, they do this type of reproduction because of like the environment that they stay in, okay? So they're trying to increase their chances of survival by doing this, okay? So energy, I didn't mention that. So a lot of the times I'm going to speak about energy, and I'm going to speak about parental care. Yeah, so just be careful, because sometimes like I don't mention the energy stuff because it just becomes very redundant. But just know if a type of strategy is going to involve like creating a lot of offspring, then a lot of energy is going to go into creating a lot of offspring, okay? So now less energy is going to be spent on taking care of that offspring because there are so many. Okay, so just things like that. Sometimes you just have to think logically about it. So yeah, they're going to spend a lot of energy reproducing. Great. Then afterwards we have K strategies. So K strategy is just basically like the opposite of R strategy, whereby they're going to have less amount of offspring, and because they have less amount of offspring, then that means that they spend less energy reproducing, but they spend more energy on parental care, okay? And then more on that is that they have a higher survival rate. So if the species give birth to 5 offspring, then 5 of those offspring could survive into their reproductive ages, or like 4 of them will survive, but a lot of them will survive, okay? And yeah, that's just about it with R and K strategies, okay? So we do have some extreme examples. So for instance, like with R, we could be looking at fishes, okay? So fish, they give birth to between 100 to thousands of different fish, not different fish. And what happens is that a lot of those fish do die, but the ones that do survive, they spread out because the water currents, and then they'll settle in different environments, and then the same process will happen again. K strategies, we could be looking at a species like an elephant. So they spend a lot of time and energy having the offspring in incubation. So an elephant can be pregnant for 2 years, and then afterwards they'll still give parental care to the baby elephants and stuff like that. And that baby elephant can live on to its reproductive age, and it will do the same cycle. Okay, so you see how elephants have got less babies than a fish does. Okay, so that kind of idea. So there's more with R strategies and less with K. Examples could be insects, it could be mammals, could be reptiles, and yeah, birds also. So yeah, so this happens in like, in a range of different species that are more terrestrial. Okay. Okay, so reproduction. There are two ways that reproduction can happen, externally and internally, okay? And this is, of course, in different species. Okay, so external fertilization is just a process whereby the species would lay eggs and what do you call it? The female would lay eggs, and then the male would come and like, put his sperm over it and then fertilize these eggs. Okay, so a lot of the times, like, this happens with like aquatic animals because they depend on the water for the eggs, like, to not to survive. So like the eggs don't die from dehydration, and also like, so that the sperm can like swim towards the eggs. Okay, so basically like the process of how this happens is that, like, let's just say that we have a fish, for example, right? So this female fish is going to lay like, thousands of eggs, and then afterwards the male is going to come and like, pour his sperm over it. Okay, but not directly over it. So what happens is that once these eggs are like, in place, what they do is that they release like, this chemical kind of substance, and what that does is that it causes the sperm cells to react and like, comes to it. So it's like a little director. Okay, and we call this kind of what do you call this stimulus, this what do you call it, response to like a chemical response to a chemical stimulus, we call this chemotaxis. Okay, so chemotaxis is a response to a, what do you call it, chemical stimulus. Cool. So then the sperm will come, and then afterwards these egg and the sperm will fuse, creating a zygote, and then afterwards like it's going to keep on developing and create a fish. Okay, so now with different kinds of species, I think like, one type could like lay their eggs on like plankton, or what do you call it, so yeah, so when they lay their eggs on plankton and then those eggs get fertilized, the eggs they get their nutrients from like, the plankton. Okay, others, some eggs have yolks in them, so that's where they get their nutrients from for growth. Okay, and yeah, and the last thing is that this egg is covered by a protective jelly coat. Okay, so this jelly coat is going to like, prevent it from dehydration. This jelly coat also holds together like, a lot of these eggs. And yeah, that's just about it with external fertilization. So a lot of the times with external fertilization is that they'll produce like, the species is going to produce like a large number of what do you call it, offspring. Okay, and this is so that it can increase its chances of fertilization and also increase its chances of creating more offspring. Okay, so examples could be fish and amphibians. Now we're going to move on to internal reproduction. Internal reproduction is just simply when like during copulation, the male injects his sperm directly into the female, and then that sperm swims over to the female's eggs, the ova, and then that's going to fertilize, and then that's going to form a zygote, and that zygote is going to develop forming an embryo, and then further on. Okay, so essentially like, this does not require water, as you can see, because of the direct what do you call it, injection of sperm into the female. Okay, so more importantly, like, because of this direct like, insertion of like sperm into the female, what happens is that less gametes are produced like, in the female, and like, maybe in the male, like compared to like a fish. So therefore like, they're going to have a less number of offspring. So instead of 1,000, they could have like 2, 3, 1, like, depending on like that. So what else was I going to say? That's very important. Okay, so yeah, and basically like, what happens with the egg after like, it has like formed after fertilization is that so what's going to happen to the egg after like, fertilization has occurred, then like, the egg can either be in a shell, or it can just grow inside this membrane that is inside the mother. Okay. So, embryonic development. We have three types of ways that the embryo can develop, okay? So it'll be ovipary, ovovipary, and vivipary, okay? So basically, ovipary is when the embryo develops in an egg outside of the mother, okay? And we have two types. We got aquatic and terrestrial animals that do this type of what do you call embryonic development, okay? So external fertilization happens, and we have a high number of offspring that results from this. And why this happens is because they want to increase their chances of fertilization and increase the chances of the living offspring, okay? And the egg is covered by a jelly coat, and yeah, so those are the aquatic ones. It's a lot similar to the external fertilization stuff that I just said. So now we have terrestrial. Terrestrial are the land ones. So these are the ones that lay eggs, and they'll probably protect these eggs and all of that. So basically, internal fertilization takes place, and with these types of species, they have a low number of offspring, okay? Only because they have to lay these eggs. They can't lay as many eggs as a fish does, because how are they going to protect them and stuff? I mean, picture snake eggs, picture chicken eggs, picture yeah, birds and stuff, so basically you can't be expected to lay 1,000 eggs in one mother, and the father must look after them. That doesn't happen. So yeah, they have a low number of offspring. So these eggs are protected by a shell, okay? And we'll get more into how the shell is structured. Okay, so examples, the aquatic ones will be fish, okay? The aquatic ones really depend on water for their fertilization. So because a lot of them they do external fertilization. And then afterwards, the terrestrial ones could be species like penguins. It could be, like I said before, snakes, some chickens, etc. Okay, so next we have ovovipary. Okay, so basically with these species, what happens is that they do internal fertilization, and the embryo develops inside of the mother in a shell. So essentially, this embryo is not connected to the mother. Okay, so like I said, internal fertilization, the egg is covered by a shell, so therefore the embryo is going to get nutrients from the yolk. Okay, so if they ask a question and be like, in ovopary development, the embryo gets its nutrition from the placenta, you say no, it doesn't. It gets it from the yolk because its egg is covered by a shell, and it grows in the mother. So often, these species, they have a low number of offspring, because of the eggs and stuff that are going to be growing in them. They don't have that many space to grow thousands, so they only grow a few inside. So they have a low number of offspring. And also, a lot of the times, if, like I said before, if you have a low number of offspring, it's because you had a high chance of fertilization. Okay, so these eggs, they are protected, from predators and temperature changes because they're inside the mother. Okay, the mother, can run away, can hide, and all this kind of stuff. But then if the eggs are left on the ground, then it's a bit difficult to protect them. But they do manage. But these species, this is how they deal with it. Okay, so examples would be some snakes, some sharks, and some lizards. Lastly, we have vivipary. So vivipary is when the embryo develops inside the mother again. So basically, when the embryo develops inside the mother, this comes from internal fertilization, and this embryo is connected to a placenta. So meaning that it's connected to the mother also, or you can see it's connected to the mother, and it receives its nutrients from the placenta. So often species like these, they have a low number of offspring, and yeah, that's just about it. Okay, so they're protected by the mother. Everything else, that is inside the where the embryo is developing. So the embryo is protected. It's fed. like its temperature is regulated, a whole bunch of stuff. And you guys will probably get more into this vivipary later on when you do the development of the human embryo. So just for now, just know these things. So some examples, we got mammals, some sharks, and even some scorpions. Hectic. So the amniotic egg, we're going to look at the characteristics of it. So the characteristics of an amniotic egg is that it's mostly done by terrestrial animals, because they lay these eggs on their land, and this happens from internal fertilization, and then the mother will lay the eggs. Okay. These eggs, they have shells, and what these shells do is that they protect them from dehydration, and it also just protects the contents that are inside. Okay, and lastly, this embryo that is growing inside the shell, it has these extra embryonic membranes. Okay, so extra embryonic membranes, are membranes that grow outside the embryo, and I'll get more into that later. But basically, these membranes, they are fluid filled. Cool. So this is the structure of an amniotic egg. Okay, so first of all, we have the embryo covered by the amnion. Okay, so the amnion contains amniotic fluid, and what that does is that it protects the embryo from shock, temperature changes, and dehydration. Okay, next up we have the yolk sac. The yolk sac, basically it contains yolk, and this yolk has got nutrients, so for the embryo to take in, and for growth and stuff like that. Okay, and then next up we have the allantois. Okay, so the allantois is important for gaseous exchange, and it also collects and stores waste. Okay, the allantois is also connected directly to the intestines of this embryo. So it's connected to the intestines of this embryo. And then next up we have the chorion. So the chorion is basically there for gaseous exchange also. And then we have a layer that is not really shown in this diagram, but it is shown between the chorion, and it is present between the chorion and the shell. Okay, and that's called the albumin. The albumin basically stores some food like proteins for the embryo. Okay, and then lastly we have the shell. The shell is porous. Okay, that's how this gaseous exchange is able to happen. So the shell is porous, and its other function is to protect the embryo from the outside world. So our extra embryonic membranes are the chorion, the allantois, the amnion, the yolk sac, and the albumin. Okay, so extra embryonic, it just basically means something that's grown outside of the embryo. Okay, extra means outside. So these are those the few extra embryonic membranes. Right, so development of the offspring. So basically we have two types of developments. We have precocial and altricial development. Okay, so precocial, I like to look at it as when the offspring is born, then it can hit the ground running. Okay, so meaning that they have characteristics such as they are able to open their eyes. They have fur, depending on what type of species it is. They can walk within hours of being born. They can move around, and they're able to if they feel that they're hungry, they can go to the mom and get milk whenever they feel like it. The mom doesn't have to come to them. You see? And a lot of the times these types of species, they spend a longer time incubation. Okay, so for example, look at an elephant, how it carries its child for 2 years. Then afterwards, it gives birth, and that elephant is able to walk. It's able to drink water. It's able to do multiple things that other species might not be able to. Okay, so a lot of time is spent in development incubation. Okay, so These species, they can also protect themselves, and how they do this is that, like, they can either camouflage with the environment, they can run, or like, what's another thing, they can like make themselves swarm. Okay, so they're able, like, to do these kinds of stuff. And a lot of the times, like, what do you call it, these species are independent, so they're going to have, like, little parental care. They will have parental care, but it will be less. Okay, so examples could be giraffes, it could be elephants, it could be zebras, it could be what else we have, like, some birds. They're also like, there are like many other types of species that do these kind of things, but like, yeah, that's just these. In summary, these are species, when they're born, they are fully developed, they're able to do a lot of things. Okay, and they have little parental care. Cool. Next up, we have the altricial development. So these are the types of babies, offspring, that are less developed. Okay, so often, like, they're born with closed eyes. They can't, like, move around. They have less hair. If they're like, an animal, they got less fur and stuff like that. They're not able to walk and grab onto things and stuff like that. So what do you call it, like, these types of species, these types of offsprings, they are dependent upon their parents. Okay, so their parents, like, will provide food for them, they will protect them, they will warm them up whenever they feel cold. They're what do you call it, responsible for regulating their body temperature, things like that. So you can see, like, how a lot of energy for the parents is spent on parental care, less of it is spent on incubation. Okay, because the incubation time for these types of species is short. Okay, so examples of these could be some birds. So we're looking at like eagles or doves, and what do you call it, some rodents, and also, like, us humans, we are like, basically this types of altricial development strategy. That's like what we go through also. So yeah, so the main point from altricial is that the offspring are highly dependent on their parents for survival, and they do, like, have a high survival rate because what do you call it, they have the parental care. You would think that it'll be less than the what do you call, the precocial ones, but no, they do grow, like, to be independent. So yeah, I think that's it from that section. Okay, so here's an example of precocial development. So you can see how this baby giraffe is, like, already up and running. It's like skipping along. It can, like, move around, it's mobile, it's fully, like, developed. And here's an example of altricial. So you see how these baby chicks, their eyes are not open, they don't have that much fur. They have to, like, stay in this nest and, like, until they are, like, fully developed. So usually with animals like these, what happens is that they're only, like, released out into the wild, like, out of their nests when they have, like, been fully developed. Okay, so I think they said that, like, when it reaches its reproductive stage, that's when they come out. So yeah, these are these baby chicks. Okay, cool. So last thing that we're going to look at is parental care. So parental care can be divided into three things. They say that there are five, or, like, more than three, but I believe that some of them is just the same. It's redundant. Okay, so we're looking at providing nutrition, providing warmth, and providing protection to the offspring. Okay, now I'm not going to go into these things because this work is kind of repetitive. Rather, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to assign you some homework that you're going to check also by yourself. But I just want you guys to also, like, think about these. Okay, so what you should do is make a table of what do you call it, that has three columns. Okay, so you're going to have the headings of each column is going to be high parental care, low parental care, and what do you call it, moderate parental care. Okay, and the species that you guys will be looking at are fish, birds, amphibians, and mammals. Okay, so you can, like, get like different examples of each of these species, and then, like, put them into this table. Okay, if you want to take it even further, you can state, like, how much energy is going to be spent on parental care, and, like, how much energy is, like, spent on reproducing these gametes, these offspring, and, like, stuff like that. You can also add in all of the other things that I've, like, discussed, where there's going to be, like, over peri, over peri, you know, all these kind of things. Try bring everything together. Okay. Alright guys, that is a wrap from me. Thank you so much for joining into Tutorbox Live in conjunction with COVID-19. I hope that all this information was helpful, resourceful, and I hope that it would be able to help you in your homework and your exams. Please can you also do the exercises that we provide for you guys, and otherwise, yeah, that's all from me. Thank you guys.